Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Norwegian Arctic island of Svalbard. It's about 800 miles from the North Pole and 500 miles north of mainland Norway. Many areas in the Arctic are surrounded by cold ocean currents, which make them too cold to support plant life. Svalbard is surrounded by relatively warm ocean currents, which raise temperatures enough to allow for some plants to grow there. These currents bring warmer air to support the 2,026 species of mosses, lichens, fungi, and plants. The farther north and south you go toward the poles, the fewer species are present in ecosystems, and the more specialized they have to be. Caribou are an example of a specialized species, and are the only large mammals on the island that are not predators. The predators on the island include Arctic fox and the polar bear. Svalbard was the center of a total solar eclipse on March 21, 2015. This stunning natural phenomenon occurs when the moon passes directly between the sun and the earth, disturbing light and shadow patterns. I experienced being close to the center of a solar eclipse in August 2017 in western Idaho. It was one of the most intriguing moments of my life, and I have photos to prove it. The announcement of the solar eclipse in Svalbard created a rush for reservations at area hotels and housing rentals. The region only has about 2,500 people, and many of them rented a room of their home out to one of the 2,000 eclipse fanatics for extra income. Svalbard is a beacon for ringed seals, walruses, and beluga whales, which are all primary prey for polar bears. Where you find prey, you'll find predators, and polar bears are plentiful here as well. Locals know that they need to pack firearms at any time when they venture away from civilization, but some visitors aren't so savvy to the rules. The authorities in the area require anyone leaving inhabited areas to carry a hunting rifle or be accompanied by a local armed guard. The danger polar bears present to unaware visitors is taken so seriously here that Ronny Brunvall, the head of the Visit Svalbard organization, states that security is number 1, 2, and 3. On the evening of March 20th, 2015, 37-year-old Jakub Marvek was resting inside of his tent for the evening. He'd traveled to Svalbard with 5 of his friends, and they'd pitched camp along a snowbank for the night. With temperatures hovering below zero and light fading by early afternoon, the campers found comfort within their tents. Each tent in the expedition had a high-powered rifle leaning outside of it for easy defense against polar bears. The group also erected a security fence around their campsite, which would alert them to any approaching bears, and then they snuggled into their warm sleeping bags. The expedition also established a bear watch, and Mrs. Sakova was on duty this evening. She'd set up outside initially and eventually got weary, moving her bear watch inside to the comfort of her tent. She knew she could rely on the bear fence to alert her of anything serious, so she reclined with confidence. Jakub was an avid outdoorsman and loved to ski, snowboard, and snowmobile. He and his friends were from Prague, Czechoslovakia, and had made their arduous trip to the town of Longyearbyen with excitement. The expedition he was with had purchased a group package that permitted them to do these activities in the lead-up to and after the solar eclipse. It was supposed to be like a vacation for them, albeit a cold one. Unbeknownst to the expedition, the fence they'd erected had been placed too high. A hungry polar bear had been wandering the area, following its nose to its next meal when it stalked up on the camp in the night. It easily slipped right under the fence without tripping the alarm, exposing the sleeping campers to whatever the bear chose to do to them. As the polar bear noiselessly padded through the camp, the scent of sleeping people undoubtedly filled its nostrils. An overload of olfactory information was bombarding the bear's nose as it sniffed each tent in turn. For some unknown reason, the polar bear found Jakub's tent most appealing. The fabric of the tent was designed to resist the rigors of wind and snow, but not the claws and teeth of polar bears. Its claws ripped through the tent with very little resistance, and it was quickly inside, atop Jakub. Jostled awake by the polar bear's claws, Jakub opened his eyes to see the gaping maw of a polar bear less than 3 inches from his face. He He yelled, "Bear! Bear!" as he scrambled to keep the bear's jaws from clamping down on his face. Using his hands, he repeatedly redirected the bear's jaws from his head. The bear used its paws to grab the man and drag him from the tent. Its claws tore long red streaks along his skin. In the tent next to Jakub's, Mrs. Jakub had let her eyes close and drifted off to sleep during her bear watch. Her slumber was abruptly halted by Jakub's cries about the bear. She scrambled from her tent, clutching the revolver that she had packed with her. Upon emerging, she could see a huge polar bear striking Jakub with his paws, only feet from her. She raised her pistol and fired the revolver at near point-blank range, striking the polar bear with more than 2 of the rounds. The camp seemed to erupt in people yelling and screaming while they converged on the bear. It had felt the impact of the revolver rounds and turned in pain and confusion. The bear dashed off to avoid any further confrontation with the people and stared back at them from only a few hundred yards outside of camp. The campers reached out to local authorities, who soon arrived by helicopter to investigate the polar bear attack on Jakub. They were armed and began following the bear's blood trail across the snow. The bear was located and shot by them only 200 meters from the camp. They took the bear's carcass back to the lab to analyze it. They were interested in knowing the causes of the predatory attack. I found no source indicating the findings of this analysis. Even though no other campers were injured during this attack, the organizer of the expedition was fined $1,200 by local authorities. It was the first time the fine was evoked for a polar bear attack. It was issued because the organizers neglected to perform basic safety precautions to protect campers and bears. Following his attack, Jakub expressed eagerness to return to Svalbard and the beauty of the Arctic. His enjoyment of the area was not diminished due to the polar bear's predatory attack. However, he did express disappointment that the bear attack forced him to seek medical attention. Consequently, he missed the eclipse. Approximately 3,000 polar bears are living around Svalbard, and only 2,500 human inhabitants. Yearly, an average of 3 polar bears are killed by residents defending their life or property. There have been a total of 5 fatal polar bear attacks on Svalbard in the last 40 years. In an episode on our channel, Horatio Chappell's fatal polar bear attack was discussed, and I've linked to it in the comment section below if you're interested in watching it. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Why do you think the campers didn't test the bear fence before they went to bed? Do you think bear spray would have prevented this attack? Would you have the discipline to shoot a polar bear in such proximity like Miss Hakova? If I'm ever put in that position, I sure hope I'm that brave. I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to, several locations in western Montana. The 2 primary locations we'll be discussing in this episode are Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park. Both locations are steep mountains with vast forests of pine, fir, and spruce trees dappled with patches of quaking aspen. The watersheds are often lined with willow bushes, and wild berries abound in both locations. Each area hosts healthy populations of moose, deer, and elk, with common predators being bobcats, black bears, cougars, coyotes, grizzly bears, and wolves. The pristine scenery and proximity to wildlife are a draw to visitors from around the world. Some of these visitors include photographers, and not all of these photographers' stories end well. Jim Cole was originally from Wisconsin, but after visiting out west decided Bozeman, Montana was the place for him. He attended the University of Colorado and was an amazing tennis player. He worked as a commercial real estate agent through his youth, but the mountains always beckoned to him. After putting away a little money selling real estate, Jim decided to fulfill his dream of becoming a nature photographer and started doing it full-time. Over the years in the woods, Jim had honed his skills as an outdoorsman. He was known to be able to hike for very long distances and hours. His lanky and lean build was a big asset in covering ground to find those photos that few people could get. He'd covered an estimated 27,000 miles in the backcountry, and his photos brought him a little cash here and there. He also took his pictures to area classrooms and wowed the kids with the close-up photos of the animals he displayed. Jim also wrote bluegrass music and sang songs about grizzly bears. His favorite place to perform was the Pine Creek Lodge in Livingston, Montana, where listeners knew him as Grizzly Jim. When Jim ventured into the backcountry to take photos, he used some questionable practices. These risky and illegal behaviors drew the attention of other photographers who would watch him approach well within the danger zone of grizzly bears through their telephoto lenses. Jim's disregard for his safety drew its share of concern and attention. His friend John Waller was a biologist at Glacier National Park and addressed his concerns with Jim on more than one occasion. Waller commented that the bears seemed to give something to Jim that was passionate and powerful. His warnings seemed to go unheeded, and his concerns grew. By the 1990s, the criticism of Jim's photography techniques drew a loud and disapproving chorus from his competition. They reported to rangers that they had watched him follow a sow grizzly and her cub, and that sow had bluff-charged Jim twice before the man would back off. Typically, photographers maintain a healthy distance from animals they photograph and give bears an even wider berth than other animals. Jim's approach was a little different and deemed unprofessional by his contemporaries. He would hide out in the anticipated path of a bear and take very close photos as the animal strolled by. Ethical photographers would move well out of the way of the bear headed toward them, but Jim would stay put, trying to get that perfect up-close shot. In 1993, this practice put Jim in very close quarters with a young grizzly, too close, in fact. He was hiking up a trail when a bear was hiking down, and was less than happy to see the man at such close distance. The grizzly attacked Jim, tore a hole in his scalp, and broke his wrist. Fortunately for Jim, his hiking partner managed to pull out his bear spray and run the youngster off before it did any more damage to him. His injuries were treated and his wounds healed. But this event did nothing to change Jim's desire to be close to grizzly bears. By the year 2004, Jim's antics finally caught up with him. Rangers had received too many complaints to ignore his disregard for the regulations. They issued him a citation for getting too close to bears when they observed him just 20 feet away from a grizzly sow and her cubs. He was crouched down behind some sagebrush, snapping photos and testing his guardian angel's patience. After being cited, Jim fought the complaint in court. He indicated that the bears had wandered up to him and agreed that he left slower than he should have. He informed the courts that he hadn't violated the law because he hadn't approached the bears, but they had wandered up to him. The courts agreed with him and dismissed the charges the park had filed against him. His case changed how the laws regarding wildlife harassment were written. Newer editions required photographers to maintain a safe distance from wildlife instead of allowing them to move within safe distances. By Wednesday, May 23, 2007, Jim's luck would once again be tested and not exactly pass with flying colors. He was 57 years old and just purchased a new digital camera. He decided to take it up to Trout Creek in Yellowstone to get some photos of the wildlife there. Furthermore, he knew the creek was a great place to find grizzlies, and his penchant for up-close angles was an itch that he had to scratch. Jim carried his equipment bag full of camera gear and bear spray on his adventure up Trout Creek and wandered a few miles into the backcountry by himself. The grass in the meadows was tall for this time of year, and Jim pushed his way through it as he was hiking toward a vantage point on an adjacent hill. Now, sometimes in life, it is what you don't know that teaches you the most valuable lessons. And Jim didn't know that a sow and her cub were bedded down in that tall grass. Jim was fascinated by getting close to bears for his photos, but this time he got much too close. He walked right up to the sow, and she ambushed him from only a few yards, rendering his bear spray nothing more than a piece of evidence at the attack scene. According to Cole, the sow pounced on him so quickly that he had very little time to react. She dashed toward him and tackled him like a linebacker on a running back. She drove his back into the ground, which disoriented him. With one quick swipe from each of her paws, she crushed his facial bones and tattered his cheeks, scalp, and nose. Then she disappeared. Though the attack lasted a few seconds at most, it left Jim in pitiful shape. As he sat up, he had to lift his eyebrow up from obstructing his vision so that he could see the sun to orient himself. He had been in this situation before, or at least a similar one, and knew he had to get back to medical help quickly. He started his 3-mile return hike on shaky legs and bleeding profusely. As he staggered for the first few miles, Jim picked up a few interested followers. 2 coyotes followed him, waiting for a chance to pounce on him should he fall and fail to rise. Jim did not doubt that the smell of his blood was permeating the forest around him, and coyotes were not the only predators with noses sensitive enough to smell it. Judy and John Taylor were visiting the Hayden Valley when a whim drew them to pull over at Trout Creek, where it crossed the road through a culvert. The couple pulled out some binoculars and began glassing the meadows in search of grazing grizzlies when they saw an odd sight in the distance. About a half-mile away they could see a man in some kind of strange mask, wearing a pack on his hip, meandering kind of toward them, but not. They kept an eye on the man as he would appear at the top of one rise, only to disappear at the bottom of a swale. Each time the man appeared, he seemed to be walking in a different location, but generally heading toward them. John and Judy discussed this odd sight and agreed that this person must be drunk, or perhaps have some kind of disability. They kept watching him for another half an hour before concluding that this man was in trouble. By this point in his journey, Jim could hear the traffic on the road. He knew he was extremely exhausted, but was driven on by the thought of rescue. By the time Jim had stumbled to within 50 yards of the road, he sat down on the bank of the creek. John pulled up his binoculars and could see that Jim's head was not covered in a mask, but in blood. John immediately knew that Jim must have been mauled by a bear, and jogged towards him. As John approached him, Jim told him that he'd been mauled by a bear, to which John replied, "I could see that." The contorted form before him looked more like a prop from a horror movie set than a human. Jim was missing his nose, eye, cheek, and ear. Jim recalled having a sense of peace and relaxation flow over him at the sound of John's voice. By 1 p.m., 4.5 hours later. As Judy approached the two men, she could see ribbons of Jim's face hanging from its proper position. The path the grizzly's claws tore through his face were distinct and started at Jim's neck and continued through his face, exiting at his scalp. What she was looking at was hard to describe as a face, let alone one on a living human being. John and Judy did their best to make Jim comfortable while they waited for an ambulance. His injuries were too serious to be treated at a medical center in the park, so he was flown to Idaho Falls and under care at Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center. Jim underwent a 7-hour surgery that Thursday to repair damage from the 2 swipes done by the sow's claws. While receiving treatment, Jim was unable to speak and had been intubated to help him breathe. He received his meals through a tube inserted into his stomach. After a considerable amount of convalescing, Jim ended up losing an eye out of the deal. He also had to have his nose, jaw, cheeks, and ear rebuilt by plastic surgeons. Authorities reviewed accounts of the attack provided by Jim, as well as his injuries. They determined the bear had acted in defense of her cubs and would not pursue action to have her killed. About 1 year after his bear attack in 2007, Jim was seated on a high ridge overlooking Hayden Valley, taking photos of bears once again. Now sporting an eye patch where he previously had an eye, Jim could see 2 grizzlies appear several hundred yards below him. The fickle breeze brought Jim's scent to the bears, and they rose to their hind legs and seemed to look directly at him. Upon looking the bears over, Jim was certain by their markings that this was the same sow and cub present at his mauling the prior year. Jim didn't reach for his bear spray, but he took hold of his camera. He wasn't afraid, and smiled as the bears dropped back to all fours and bounded back into the trees. Kerry Gunther is a bear biologist at Yellowstone National Park. He indicated that Jim is the only person to be attacked by 2 grizzly bears in all of North America. On July 22, 2010, at the age of 60, Jim Cole passed away by himself at his private residence from natural causes. Throughout his life, he had violated common sense and laws in pursuit of his passion and paid the price more than once. He compiled 3 books detailing his adventures and displaying his photos. If you're interested in them, you can find them by searching for his name. After reviewing the facts regarding this episode, I'm left with more than a few questions for you, but I will limit it to only 3 or so. Have you ever felt a passion that caused you to set aside your own personal safety and disregard laws? Do you view Jim's actions as a death wish or a life wish? Do you think it was the same sow and cub that Jim saw from the high ridge that attacked him the prior year? I will enjoy reading and replying to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a place very near to the location of one of our prior episodes. On the Kenai Peninsula, in the south part of Alaska, the Kenai River is fed by Kenai Lake and Skylac Lake, and runs to the brim with salmon at certain parts of the summer. The mountains to the southeast give way to rolling hills, which turn into broad forested plains just before dropping into Cook Inlet. Where the mountains turn into rolling hills is where Skylac Lake is positioned. The peaks here don't soar as high as in other locations in the state, but climb to just below 5,000 feet in elevation. The power of nature is felt here twice a day, as the Cook Inlet is filled, then emptied, when the tide rolls in and out. Birch, hemlock, and spruce trees provide an emerald shroud over the land to shelter the huge moose that trod the trails. There are many smaller animals here, including foxes, porcupines, hares, lynx, and black bears. But as they seek the salmon in the streams, it is the huge brown bears that are most dangerous. At around 4:30 p.m. on August 4th, 2015, 20-year-old Gabrielle Markel was getting ready to go for a jog with her co-worker and friend, 26-year-old Caitlin Haley. The two were employees of Alaska Wildland Adventures Lodge, which is located on the southern shore of Skylac Lake. Gabrielle's stepdad, Kirk Hosley, was the president of the lodge and hired the girls onto their 9-person staff for the season. The lodge has 20 guests at a time, at most, and provides its visitors with a high-quality vacation experience without compromising comfortable accommodations, according to its website. It is an ecotourism destination that appeals to those in favor of learning about and preserving nature and resources. Each season, the lodge staff and guests complete bear awareness training, which instructs them on how to be bear aware and safe in bear country. As the young women donned their jogging shoes, they planned out their route for their run. Several trails along the lake passed near the lodge and made easy access to trails of varying difficulties. They chose to run up the Cottonwood Creek Trail, which ran directly south of the lodge, and climbed a few hundred feet along its course. As the salmon splashed their way up the stream, the women covered the better part of a mile, surrounded by the beauty of the forest and the fresh mountain air. As they came up to a sharp turn in the trail, they heard an ominous sound in the brush, only a few feet away from them. Now, a part of bear awareness training is focused on how to handle a bear at close range, and how to utilize bear spray to protect yourself. Gabrielle was carrying bear spray with her on this job, and had practiced using it, just in case she needed it. It isn't clear whether the bear was flushed from cover by the joggers, or emerged from it to attack them, but somehow the massive brown bear met them on the trail. Gabrielle pulled her bear spray up as the bear closed in on her, but was unable to dispense the irritant before the bear attacked her. It focused its anger on Gabrielle, knocked her to her back, and bit and clawed her. Caitlin could only watch as the bear huffed and growled as it stood over Gabrielle. She knew she was powerless to defend her own life, let alone her friend's life, and immediately dashed back toward the lodge to find help. The last she had seen of Gabrielle was of her lying on her back, with the bear obscuring her with its massive body. I can only imagine the fear and terrible thoughts that went through her mind. She used them for fuel to propel her down the trail as she arrived in record time. A small rescue team was quickly assembled and headed up Cottonwood Creek Trail to save Gabrielle. They wouldn't have to search too hard for her, because a few hundred yards from where Caitlin had left her, Gabrielle was now slowly walking toward them. Gabrielle was bloody and beaten up, but was able to communicate. The group looked around to see if the bear was following her, but couldn't find it. The rescuers assisted Gabrielle back to the lodge and started working on cleaning her wounds and stopping the bleeding. There were several bite wounds on Gabrielle's head, back, and arm, along with several deep scratches from the bear's claws, but nothing immediately life-threatening. In bear attack terms, her injuries were mild compared to what they could have been, which is kin to saying it was a moderate grenade explosion. They knew that injuries from a bear attack can be misleading, though, and appear to be not as serious as they are. While at the lodge, the staff reached out to 911 to request help to the lodge for Gabrielle. The dispatch guided the lodge staff through assessing Gabrielle's injuries, and they agreed that the best thing to do would be to get her across Skylac Lake to the boat launch southwest of Sterling. Gabrielle was helped into the boat for the half-hour boat ride across the lake, where an ambulance was waiting for her. She was taken to the local medical center, but her wounds were too serious for treatment there. A helicopter flew Gabrielle to Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage for further medical support. Gabrielle was admitted in serious condition, but by the following day her status had been upgraded to good condition. As a precaution, the refuge temporarily closed the Cottonwood Creek Trail until an investigation could be completed. Stephen Miller, who was a deputy refuge manager, stated that the investigation would focus on the cause of the bear attack and wanted to see if there was an animal carcass near the trail that the bear could have been defending. After looking the area over, the investigators determined that Gabrielle's attack was most likely a defensive attack due to the women jogging up too close to the bear. He stated that the salmon were running up the creek, which would bring bears to its banks. Rushing waters and streams can drown out the noise of approaching people, as well as bears, setting up a potentially tense confrontation. Miller also stated that there was no way to identify the bear since it had immediately fled the area. He noted that the refuge was not interested in putting the bear down due to the nature and circumstances of the attack. Following Gabrielle's attack, Jeff Sellinger, a biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, pointed out that there are typically 2 or 3 bear attacks in this area each year. Ken Marsh is a spokesman for the Alaska Fish and Game. He advised people who find themselves involved in a confrontation with a brown bear to fall into a fetal position, covering their head and neck the best they can. Laying still should cause the bear to see that you are not a threat, and it will generally lose interest in you and leave. This advice works great when fish are running and bears are content. But after the salmon stop running, Mr. Marsh fails to list a strategy to deal with a bear demonstrating predatory behavior. After completing their investigation, authorities declined to identify a clear cause for Gabrielle's attack. Alaska Wildland Adventure Lodge's general manager commented that employees had been hiking the trails around the lodge for 15 years without incident before Gabrielle's attack. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. How do you know if you should curl into a fetal position or defend yourself in a bear attack that occurs within only a few seconds? Given the bear bit Gabrielle's head, do you think it was trying to kill her? Since there were no cubs sighted at the attack site, was this bear defending its fishing grounds? Is ecotourism a realistic business model, or does it intrude into bear habitat unnecessarily? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.